A very good evening. Staying with us on Tv47 News tonight. These are some of the stories making headlines. On Tv47 News tonight. Should you care about the mask you wear to protect you from COVID-19? Well, yes, you should. And it should be more than just a mere concern. Your life depends on it, and it could also endanger your life. Details here tonight. Also tonight, teachers employed by the Board of Management in public schools will start receiving a monthly salary from the government until schools reopen in January. Plus, elected leaders from the coast region now threaten to dump ODM and form their own party following the defeated Irungu Kangata amendment on the revenue share motion. And police accused of using extreme force in Olpusimoro, where at least 4 people have been killed since Tuesday this week in renewed ethnic clashes. Is Faith Cheptile. Now, the death toll from the ongoing tribal clashes in Olpusimoro area has risen to 2 after another person was killed in the area. Now, this even as locals have started accusing police of using excessive force on them. Nanok Loren has the details.
In the recent violence, residents of Olpusimoro area confronted police officers as violence erupted in the area. The death toll has now risen to 2 after another person was killed while 5 others were injured, leaving them with bullets in their bodies. Led by a member of County Assembly, Rebecca Nanyu, the residents are urging the Independent Police Oversight Authority, IPOA, to investigate the incidents and take action against the officers.
Tungependa kuuliza mama ambaye ndiye anachea IPOA, tunataka ukuje Narok kwa sababu wale watoto ambao walikufa jana ni vijana wachanga, wamewacha jamii ndogo, familia ndogo, watoto wachanga. Wewe ni mama na unasikia uchungu kama mama. Tunataka wewe mwenyewe uje Narok kufanya hiyo investigations kwa sababu kuna evidence ya kutosha ya kwamba polisi walitumia nguvu jana kunyanyaza watu.
Want to ask the county commissioner to sack and the security operators to sack all grassroots commanders from Olokurto Pusumoru who made orders for shooting.
The police, through the regional coordinator, have pledged to crack down on instigators of violence in the area. A teenage boy who was herding cattle in Olmariko area was shot and wounded by suspected cattle rustlers.
We call on the county commissioner, who is the head of security of this county, to take immediate action. Lack of immediate action will be working against us. You need to bring these policemen to book for assault, for murder.
Residents are now imploring the county commissioner to provide a long-lasting solution. Nanok Loren, TV47.
NPCA Secretary General Reverend Peter Kania, who died of COVID-19, has been laid to rest in Kikuyu, Kiambu County. And Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe being in attendance, very few Ministry of Health guidelines were observed. Zainab Mohammed reports.
This was the final journey of the late Reverend Peter Kania Kariuki, who was the Secretary General of PCEA Church. Despite the government directives which allowed only a few people to attend the burial ceremony, here the directives were not followed even after Kania died of COVID-19. Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe and Deputy President William Ruto were among those in attendance. Speaking during the ceremony, Deputy President William Ruto urged Kenyans to adhere to government directives to curb the spread of COVID-19 in the country, with over 19,000 cases reported by Thursday.
Let us not look for who to blame. Let us not point fingers. Let us take up our responsibility individually as citizens to ensure that we do not lose life and to ensure that we minimize infections by adhering to the protocols that have been issued by the government of Kenya through the Ministry of Health.
Despite Deputy President William Ruto attending the burial, Cabinet Secretary for Health Mutahi Kagwe represented President Uhuru Kenyatta, who in his condolences message, the president remembered Kanya as a humble and a God-fearing man.
Recall his action-oriented gospel in which, during this period of COVID-19 pandemic, he came up with the Adopt a Family initiative. Through this initiative, the PCEA helped feed over 32,000 families throughout East Africa in the months of April and May.
Peter Kanya is among the 325 people who have succumbed to coronavirus in the country since the first case of coronavirus was reported in the country on March this year.
And the country's COVID-19 tally is 7 cases away of the 20,000 mark after 788 cases were confirmed today. The Ministry of Health says that 14 more patients succumbed to the virus, bringing the tally to 325 deaths so far. 100 patients have recovered in the last 24 hours. Nairobi County registered the highest numbers today at 487, Kiambu 86 cases, Nakuru 34, Kajiado 26, while Mombasa recorded 25 cases.
I think I can't respond to that any more than simply say that government systems have a way of monitoring utilization of funds. We have several oversight bodies that are responsible for monitoring use of those funds. And I do not know the report that you refer to. I haven't seen that article, but I think we will leave it to the proper agencies to answer that question, pose that question, if they so feel that there is a need to do so.
In terms of the number of cases, today we have 1,275 Kenyans admitted in various hospitals throughout the Republic. Out of these, 56 are in ICU setting. 34 are on ventilatory support, meaning that machine is breathing on their behalf because they have a serious COVID infection and their lungs are not functioning optimally. And then 20 are on supplemental oxygen support, meaning they are in ICU, but with additional oxygen we give them, they can be able to maintain their saturation and provide enough oxygen for their bodies to function optimally. 2 are on observation in ICU, meaning they have come from the very critical to oxygen supplementation, but basically we are just observing them to see whether they can now move from ICU to HDU and the ordinary ward.
Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health has defended against claims of misappropriation of COVID-19 funds. Chief Administrative Secretary in the Ministry of Health, Dr. Rashid Aman, says the investigating authorities are free to investigate the expenditure of the funds.
I think I can't respond to that any more than simply say that government systems have a way of monitoring utilization of funds. We have several oversight bodies that are responsible for monitoring the use of those funds. And I do not know the report that you refer to. I haven't seen that article, but I think we will leave it to the proper agencies to answer that question and pose that question if they so feel that there is a need to do so.
In terms of the number of cases, today we have 1,275 Kenyans admitted in various hospitals throughout the Republic. Out of these, 56 are in ICU setting. 34 are on ventilatory support, meaning that machine is breathing on their behalf because they have a serious COVID infection and their lungs are not functioning optimally. And then 20 are on supplemental oxygen support, meaning they are in ICU, but with additional oxygen we give them, they can be able to maintain their saturation and provide enough oxygen for their bodies to function optimally. 2 are on observation in ICU, meaning they have come from the very critical to oxygen supplementation, but basically we are just observing them to see whether they can now move from ICU to HDU and the ordinary ward.
And Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha has announced that teachers employed by schools boards of management will receive their monthly salaries. This is in a bid to cushion them from the COVID-19 effects. Now, meanwhile, universities and tertiary institutions will be opened next year, with the government saying very few have complied with the COVID-19 measures. Andrew Kilemi with the details.
Remember, when we are learning about...
Approximately 120,000 teachers employed by schools' boards of management have a reason to smile after the government promised to pay their salaries after months of suffering. Many schools have not been paying teachers employed by the boards, while their colleagues under the Teachers Service Commission continue to earn their monthly salaries, despite the schools being closed.
Even though usually BOM teachers are not usually paid directly from the ministry. They are employed by the Board of Management from other incomes that they generate. The President, in his wisdom, has directed that money be made available for this function, and it is not just for the BOM teachers. We shall also ensure that money for utilities are released, money for maintenance are released, and all other stuff.
In a consultative meeting with education stakeholders, Professor George Magoha launched a community-based learning that will require teachers to deal with learners within their locality without having to move from one place to another.
The idea is small communities where the teacher teaches in his own local community. The way Kenyans behave, you'll find a good teacher attracts people from far. If that is found, there will be a consequence.
Teachers need to engage learners meaningfully using innovative approaches. And as we continue in the situation that we are in, now more than ever, our teachers need to be innovative so that we can also keep our learners positively engaged.
And as the country grapples with the novel coronavirus, it is now clear that all learning institutions, including universities and technical centers, will remain shut until 2021.
Magoha further urged university school heads to continue offering virtual learning, examinations and virtual graduations.
Andrin Kilemi for TV47.
Many thanks for staying with us on TV47 News tonight. Let's take a short break. We'll be back with much more. Welcome back. Now, it is compulsory for Kenyans to put on a mask whenever in a public place as the government strives to keep a surge in COVID-19 infections at bay. This has led to all manner of mask innovations, raising questions on their efficiency at preventing COVID-19 transmissions. And as David Mudoka reports, is the mask you wear safe for you?
How safe is your mask? How confident are you that it guarantees you absolute protection from the COVID-19 disease? Could some of us be doing it all wrong?
Our quest to find out the various types of masks Kenyans are donning took us to some of Nairobi's busiest streets. Each Kenyan who passed by had their mask in tow, from the prestigious KN95 mask to the common surgical mask to the fashionable sponge and cloth masks, in adherence to government directive to all Kenyans to ensure they put on a mask whenever in a public place. But the variety is raising concern on the efficiency of these masks at keeping COVID-19 at bay. And with entrepreneurs competing to sell their product, cheaper masks made from all manner of material are making inroads into the market. Now surgical masks are even going for as little as 20 shillings, an interesting and significant drop of 80 shillings. A couple of months ago, the same mask was going for 100 shillings. The drop in price reflecting the stiff competition in the masks business. And for some of the Kenyans oblivious of how safe their masks are, what matters is the fashion statement they send to the rest of the public. For others, putting on a mask is a security measure over a health initiative.
Sioni kizuia yote. Watu wanakuta mask zingine umenunua ndio, lakini hata ukivaa huwezi hata breathe. So lazima tu utahang ukitembea ukiwe sawa.
Studies revealed that the KN95 mask offers the strongest protection with a 95% success rate in keeping coronavirus at bay. The surgical mask, synonymous with medical use, has an equal 95% efficiency rate, as well as the FFP1 mask. However, the cloth and sponge mask have a 0% efficiency rate at keeping viruses at bay, raising concern on the safety of most Kenyans who rely on the two to prevent them against COVID-19 infections. Health CAS Dr. Rashid Aman, however, insists that for effective prevention of spread of COVID-19, wearing of masks ought to be coupled with social distancing. Not even the best of masks can guarantee zero spread of the virus.
Masks should not be seen in isolation. Wearing a mask alone is not sufficient to protect you. Coupling wearing of the mask with maintaining the distance is the key thing.
This, as Health Director General Dr. Patrick Amoth says the government is set to standardize local production of masks through the Kenya Bureau of Standards KEBS to boost their efficiency and quality.
But now that the cloth masks are also in fashion, we are working with Kenya Bureau of Standards to ensure that we have at least a semblance of standard, even if it is for our own local use.
The strength of the fight against COVID-19 chain primarily depends on the mask's link. One wrong move might backtrack strides the government has made in keeping the nation safe. David Muthoka, TV47.
And in politics, MPs from the coastal region are now decrying of betrayal by the Orange Party in the disputed third-generation revenue-sharing formula. The MPs are now threatening to leave the party. Meanwhile, a section of MPs from the Mount Kenya region are blaming ODM boss Raila Odinga of the standoff, claiming he did not whip his members.
The revenue-sharing formula has elicited mixed reactions across the political divide, with ODM MPs from coastal counties now threatening to ditch ODM.
We will have far-reaching political consequences and ramifications at the coast, and that their votes consequentially mean a divorce notice to the fraternity at the coast region.
Wakati wa ugavi wa rasilimali, leo wabunge wote wa Luo Nyanza wanapiga vita sehemu ambazo zilikuwa ni ngome za ODM zilizokufa na wao. Kwa hivyo sisi hatutakuwa tukifanya ndoa ya mpango wa kando. Ndoa ya safari ya mwaka 2022 itakuwa ni ndoa ya umoja, ndoa ya wapwani, ndoa ya kurudisha rasilimali na ndoa halali.
Kwa sababu hata sisi tutakuwa na national kiongozi ambaye atakuwa anatuwakilisha katika ngazi za juu. Hata sisi kama wabunge wa Pwani na viongozi wa Pwani tumesema safari hii hakuna kubebea wengine mizigo. Tunataka tubebe mizigo yetu.
The MPs are accusing the party of abandoning them, with the counties in the region expected to lose if the third generation formula will be effected. This is after a section of ODM senators opposed proposals by Majority Whip Rongo Kangata to defer the formula for 2 years.
Na inasikitisha sana venye Pwani imekufa na uongozi wa baba. Litoke huku liende huku. Pwani imesimama na baba. Kwa jua, kwa mvua, Pwani imesimama na baba. Saa hii tunahitaji Nyanza sana. Na kweli Waswahili walisema kufadhi kwa dhiki ndio rafiki.
Tumekuwa sana sisi na tumesupport sana sisi chama cha ODM. Na tunataka kusema bila uoga ya kwamba katika wakati huu ambao tunawahitaji sana wale wenzetu, lakini juzi walituonesha ya kwamba hawatuhitaji tena. Kwa hivyo Waswahili wanasema nyege na nyege ni kunyegezana. Tuliwanyegeza, saizi hawataki kutunyegeza sisi. Tunasema safari ya hatua 1000 inaanza na hatua moja. Pwani tumeng'oa nanga.
A section of legislators from Central Kenya are, however, blaming ODM leader Raila Odinga for what they termed as failing to whip his members to support the Kangata amendments.
Kama wenzangu wa pande hiyo ingine wangekuja wanisupport venye niliweza kumobilize watu wa Jubilee, hii motion ingepita. Na sisi tutaendelea kupigania haki ya pesa zikuje kwa wananchi kuliko kwenda kuangazia other parameters.
Marafiki wetu tutawajua kwa hii kura itapigwa kwa Senate. Kama wewe hapana unga sisi mkono kama watu ya Mlima Kenya, saa ile tunapata rasilimali ya kufanya maendeleo, usijifanye wewe ni rafiki wetu. Kwa sababu wao wanajifanya ni marafiki wetu, saa ile tunaumiza watu wetu.
Siku ya formula kupita, yeye aliandika kwa katika magazeti ati amesema formula ipite. Na hiyo siku akaandikia watu yake message. Akawaambia ikipita wewe umepoteza kiti. Kwa hivyo Raila, tumejua wewe sio rafiki yetu. Wewe ni mtu wa kuja kuharibu maneno yetu ya chama ya Jubilee na serikali.
Na ulikuwa umejigamba hapa sana. Sasa jisaidie. Sababu sasa hii ni mambo ya watu ya Kiharu na Murang'a. Mimi nitakwambia kama vile mwizi, kama mwizi vile aliambia Yesu, kama wewe ni mwana wa Mungu, wewe jitoe kwa msalaba. Sasa wewe Kangata, kama unapendwa sana, kwa nini sasa umeshindwa kupitisha mswada ya kuleta mali kwa watu ya Murang'a?
Senate, which failed to agree on formula, will sit on Tuesday next week. Elizabeth Muchuku, TV47 Nairobi.
Now, Siaya Governor Cornel Rasanga was put to task to explain how his county got into a tussle over 5 billion shillings for a piece of land, a battle which saw the county part with 9 million shillings. Appearing before the Senate County Public Accounts and Investments Committee, Rasanga was required to explain the rationale for the payment, with Siaya Senator James Orengo questioning how a piece of land could cost 5 billion shillings in the rural county. Now, however, the county legal department did not provide documentation detailing the basis used to arrive at the value of the land, a copy of the remuneration order, and calculation of the fee.
Secondly, we'll need to have a remuneration order that you have received in your favor, so that we can then know how to use that in our mitigation approaches. And thirdly, you have already provided there's a variance in the calculation of the fee note that you have provided for. And I think we need to carefully look at that calculation and see whether it's in tandem with what the original idea was or out of tandem. And finally, you have already given us the status of the case. Can you confirm to this committee that this case has been ruled in your favor? And then subsequently, what the orders were given, we can then look at it, justification for 9 million and how you're going to recover that money, so that the county government does not lose money.
Anything, but to give them an opportunity, if there is any explanation which is upon them, and if that explanation is not believable to us, we will retreat or retire and decide as best we think. So those are the reasons that were informing this, and I do not think that there will be an opportunity to cook any document. In any event, these things have been given on oath, and if there is any cooking, the danger of perjury is hanging over the cook or the person who intends to cook, and a sanction or a judicial sentence of 7 years for perjury might just visit that person.
China, Canada, Ethiopia and Rwanda are among 11 countries that will be allowed to resume international flights to Kenya from Saturday this week. While announcing the protocols for resumption on international flights in the country, Transport Cabinet Secretary James Macharia has said the countries cleared have shown a decline in COVID-19 cases with limited transmissions. As the government prepares for the resumption of international flights into and out of the country on Saturday this week, the Ministry of Transport has issued protocols to be followed. Transport Cabinet Secretary James Macharia says only 11 countries have been cleared to fly into the country. They include China, Canada, South Korea, Japan, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Switzerland, Uganda, Rwanda, Namibia and Morocco.
Let me say this is not a blanket approval. And so we do have initially a list of countries from which passengers will be allowed. This will be a list which will be reviewed on an ongoing basis, because you know this issue about COVID is not static. It gets better, it gets worse. So whereas we have an initial list here, by tomorrow we shall review that list, depending on circumstances on the ground when we do the global mapping of the threat and intensity of the coronavirus.
All passengers arriving into the country with PCR symptoms will be exempted from quarantine. Passenger tickets for clearance will be allowed to proceed to their hotels or residence, while passengers departing after curfew with valid air tickets and boarding passes will be allowed to proceed to destinations or departure airports. Drivers picking or dropping passengers past curfew hours at the airport will have to show evidence. Passengers departing after curfew with valid air tickets and boarding passes will also be allowed to proceed to destination or departure airport. Air operators will have to provide guidance materials for passengers on preventative measures on board. Where physical distancing is not guaranteed, the crew must make reminder announcements. Ministry of Transport says it is reviewing timing of flights to facilitate physical distancing at the flights. The Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure, in collaboration with Airport Authority, will also review the timing of flights to facilitate physical distancing at the airport.
In terms of the protocol, number 2 of what we are going to highlight, for those passengers traveling out of the country, meaning you and me, they'll be required to abide by the particular travel, health, and COVID-19 related requirements of the destination country. So before you travel, make sure that you know where you're going, what that country expects. We also like to put some heavy responsibility on the airlines. Before you board your passengers, just like you check on the visa requirements, just make sure that your passengers comply with the requirements of where they're going.
At least 5 international companies have confirmed to resume their flights into the country. The 5 are Qatar Airways, British Airways, KLM, Emirates and Air France, according to Tourism Cabinet Secretary Najib Balala. And as the world celebrates the Day Against Trafficking in Human, it is a paradox that human trafficking is still a concern in the 21st century. A new report now shows that women are the most affected in human trafficking. Elilo Gova reports.
According to the latest report by the Awareness Against Human Trafficking, the female gender remains an easy target for human traffickers in the country. From a total of 586 victims of human trafficking this year, women were 85% and men were just 15%. Adult victims were the majority at 80%, while minors were 20%. The most common forms of exploitation meted on victims of human trafficking include forced labor at 70%, sexual exploitation at 20%, forced marriage at 4%, and being subjected to begging in the streets at 2%. Most victims of human trafficking in Kenya were trafficked from Nepal, Uganda, Tanzania, DRC, Burundi, India, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Cameroon, South Sudan, and Pakistan. And as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to ravage the world, the situation is not getting any better as more people are getting into the precipice of abject poverty. Poverty is a prime prey ground for human traffickers. Eli Logova, TV47, Nairobi.
Thank you, Eli. Story, and we shall be having that discussion on human trafficking in Kenya, and if the coronavirus pandemic has elevated the vice in the country. Don't go away. We'll be back with much more. TV47 News tonight. Now let's get to our discussion. We'll be talking about human trafficking in the country. And today, being 30th of July, it was a day the world marks human trafficking, or a day against human trafficking in the country and all over the world. And to speak to us about it, or to enlighten us more about it, is Sophie Otiende, who's a Trafficking in Persons Report Hero 2020, and also a survivor. Sophie, thank you. Sophie Otiende, thank you for speaking to us tonight. Before we talk about how this has impacted, or how COVID-19 has impacted the vice, has elevated the vice, briefly tell us about your experience and how you were able to get out of it.
My family went through a hard time, and my father basically lost his job, and he gave money to my uncle to take me to school, and he did not take me to school. My uncle did not take me to school. Instead, he kept me in his house, and in his house I was sexually abused, I was physically abused, and did not go to school for a whole year. It was only by luck that I got out of the situation, and because my parents were really committed to me going back to school, they managed to take care of me until where I am right now. So that's my story.
Thank you for that. Before you talk to women or anybody who's a victim at the moment, or who's going through this, how to get out of it, according to your report, 9 out of 10 victims, that's 85% of the victims are female, while 15% are male. Why are women so vulnerable?
I think women are vulnerable because of the issue of gender equality in the community, and because of some of the cultural aspects that actually make women vulnerable. Poverty affects women more because of the issue of gender equality. Of course, things like trafficking will affect women more. As a result of that, most of the time, girls are affected because sometimes in some families, people will prefer to educate boys more than they'll prefer to educate girls. When you think about issues like the fact that girls have expenses like pads and have to take care of themselves, it's really you find that girls are basically more at risk. And then from our numbers, most of those women are also single mothers and are breadwinners. So you realize that the fact that the issues of taking care of our family, the responsibility of taking care of our family and taking care of children lies mainly on women, and as a result, that makes them vulnerable.
Now, since the pandemic of COVID-19, it's affected a lot of things, the economy, and thousands of youths have been rendered jobless. Women, you've just said that women are the most affected. How has this affected the rise of the vice, if it has in any way?
So most of the numbers that are out there are showing that online child sexual exploitation has increased as a result of the pandemic. So we are seeing more and more children being abused online because people are staying home and people have access to the internet. So it means that children are actually at risk in the homes that they are staying. Apart from that, because as a result of the ban on travel, we are seeing more and more people who travel abroad and have been trafficked abroad vulnerable, because now the people that had employed them or had kept them in bondage are releasing them on the streets. There's been a lot of stories of Kenyans, Ethiopians who are stuck in the Middle East and want to come back home. Their employers who are abusing them have left them with no help. Absolutely, and they don't even know how they are going to get back home. Back home, we have most of our survivors who had even recovered, had started their lives and were doing well, who are now vulnerable. They're vulnerable because of anxiety. Some of them have lost their living because they no longer have the chance to actually make a living from the businesses that they started. So definitely it's not an easy time for survivors of trafficking.
Right. Sophie, you mentioned earlier you are able to get out, and most of the time, or in most cases, most people don't get out, and if they do, they get out in body bags. So how does one get out and get out safely?
It's, to be honest, it's pure luck. You know, it's pure luck that someone like me got out and other people came in body bags, or other people don't get to survive it. And that's why it's extremely important for the community to be responsible. That's why it's extremely important for you to speak up when you see someone using a child as a house help. That's why it's important when someone is thinking, when a relative is thinking of traveling, for you to make sure that they are safe, and that the information that they have is the information that they need. It's pure luck. Of course, we also need systems in place. We need the police. We need people to speak up. We need a system for survivors when they need help to be able to reach out, so that this can be able to, so that people can be safe. But to be honest, right now, whether you survive or not is just pure luck.
Let's talk a bit about the government. Has the government demonstrated any effort in eliminating the vice, human trafficking, in the country?
The government has demonstrated some effort. So I would say, like, when it comes to the police, currently the government has 2 units in the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, DCI, that deals exclusively with trafficking. But the problem mainly where we haven't seen a lot of work is in supporting survivors of trafficking. So we see that even when the police actually rescue victims of trafficking, they go into these places and they raid, it's extremely difficult to access services as a survivor of trafficking. And that's where our most gap is. Identification of victims of trafficking is also difficult, just because the implementation of the national referral mechanism is not where it's supposed to be. So there's still a lot of work that the government could do to actually assist victims.
Right, Sophie, when you talk about giving support to the survivors, what kind of support are you talking about? I would like you to maybe elaborate on that.
So what normally happens is survivors go through different kinds of abuse, psychological, physical, and essentially when they come back with trauma, and they need aid, they need psychological aid, they need to get back their lives. So they also need economic empowerment. People need to go to schools, people need healthcare. And some of these are gaps that are in our system. If we had proper social protection systems, it would be extremely easy to say, come back home, and say you're coming back to this. But most of the time, there are survivors who've actually said their experience of trafficking was way better than coming back home. And that is really bad. When you think about trafficking as an abuse, and someone tells you going back home is worse than the abuse I'm facing where I am. So there's a lot that needs to be done. For a common wananchi, it's just being keen, being keen and noticing what is happening around you, reporting in case you see these things happening around you, and also donating to organizations like HEART that are basically doing the work, are out here working with children, working with the women who've been affected. So that's what support.
Right. Let's talk about our children for a moment, because they're exposed to social media and whatnot. So has the digital platforms become like a new dungeon for new age slavery?
Yes. The thing is, the issue of trafficking is trafficking has the ability to evolve. And essentially, depending on where you are. So, for example, the way trafficking occurs in the coast is not the same way it occurs in Nairobi. It's not the same way it occurs in in Northeastern. It adapts. And right now, with the internet, we've exposed like a whole new, platform that we are not fully aware of. And most of our children right now are constantly on screens. And some of it is unmonitored. People are coming and recruiting children online and basically grooming them and then abusing them. And once a child has been groomed, it's extremely difficult actually to rehabilitate children that have been groomed, because you have someone who is controlling a child without actually even having physical chains. So we all need to be careful. We all need to be vigilant, even as children, as we become digital, as we use these tools to entertain ourselves and to educate ourselves. So I always say the digital platform is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. And when it's right now, especially when children are at home, it's extremely important to check what your child is watching and to actually teach our children how to manage this access in the right way.
So if we keep talking about what parents can do, but do you have any tips of how parents can better monitor what their kids are watching online, who they're talking to? How can they monitor all this?
So there are definitely tools online. There are definitely tools online that you can be able to use to ensure that there's security. One of the easiest things to do is just to make sure that you actually have access to what your child is watching and you're monitoring it. There are child-friendly platforms and child-friendly apps that you can be able to use for your child. And my advice it would be to look at some of those things. So monitor, make sure that your child is not watching, like, for example, if it's YouTube, the full YouTube, that they're actually watching YouTube specifically for children. Looking at social media, it's also important to look at age appropriate. Like, is your child the right age to actually be accessing social media? Are you looking at who your child is speaking to? So small things like that will go a long way in ensuring that children are safe.
Right. As we wind up, Sophie, we mentioned that it's absurd to be having this happening in the 21st century. So being a part of this organization and the battle, would you say that it's getting any better in terms of the fight against human trafficking?
I think it's getting better in the sense that people are becoming more aware. But in terms of any other thing beyond that, I would say it's the awareness that, and when people are aware, it means that people can, so when people start being aware, it means that we can actually think of new solutions. So for me, that is the high point in this fight, that people are starting to be aware of the issue.
All right, thank you so much, Sophie Otiende, for speaking to us. Sophie Otiende is a survivor of human trafficking and also Trafficking in Persons Report Hero 2020. Thank you so much for all you're doing, Sophie, and for your time tonight. Now, communication giant Safaricom has appointed Michael Joseph as the new chairman of the board. His appointment comes after the 13-year reign of Nicholas Ngang, who has served chairman and non-executive director since 2007. The company says Michael Joseph will be tasked with overseeing the operations, leadership, and governance of the board, ensuring effectiveness and setting the agenda. Michael Joseph previously worked as the CEO of Safaricom from July 2000 when the company was relaunched. And in sports, Football Kenya Federation presidential aspirant Herbert Mwachiro has called on FKF members to save the sports from what he terms as a downward trajectory. Mwachiro, who is a former FKF deputy CEO, says the halting of FKF elections by the Sports Disputes Tribunal should be a wake-up call to the current leadership on the need for fair play.
Nataka hali ya mpira nchini Kenya iwe ambayo wadhamini washiriki watasema kweli sasa mpira wetu umetengenezwa vizuri, umeboreshwa, tuweke fedha zetu katika mpira nchini Kenya ili wachezaji waume na wake wawe na mapato daraja ya juu pekee, lakini daraja la pili, daraja la tatu, hadi paka soka mashinani. Tunasema lazima tuwe na mipangilio ambayo ni ya kuboresha mpira wetu, ni mipangilio ambayo mashirika, makampuni makubwa hapa ya Kenya na mengine pia yatasema hapa nchini Kenya sasa uongozi wa mpira unatufurahisha, hebu na sisi tuweke pesa zetu shilingi kwa shilingi, dolari kwa dolari.
And Gianni Infantino's stay at the helm of world's football governing body hangs on a balance after criminal proceedings were launched against the FIFA president. Infantino is implicated in a corrupt dealing with Swiss Attorney General Michael Lauber, who has offered his resignation. Both Oba and Infantino have denied any wrongdoing.